Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today, my guest is Andreas Vogelsanger. Andreas is the CEO of the AFC Vietnam Fund, and I'm happy to have him with us today to talk about recent developments in Vietnam stock market. Welcome, Andreas.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Andreas, Vietnam's economic outlook is currently strained with the recent surge of the virus and re-imposition of lockdowns. How has this affected Vietnamese companies and Vietnamese capital markets?
The recent outbreak of the fourth wave of COVID-19 had indeed a negative impact on mainly the stock market. I mean, we saw the VNI, the Vietnam Index, which is the main index in Vietnam, has a month-to-date performance of minus 9.3%. So that's quite a sharp correction, I have to say. And but putting that into context a little bit, I mean, until the end of June, the Vietnam Index increased by 28%, which makes that one of the best performing markets globally. So we had already a very, very strong performance, and the profit taking after such strong gains is actually natural. Of course, these correction has been triggered now by COVID, and we will be talking about it a little bit later. But yes, it had a negative impact, and mainly, I mean, domestic travel industry and retail sectors were hit most. But financial markets look beyond the current numbers. And if I look at the manufacturing sector, which is the most important sector in Vietnam, it's actually, I would say, the impact so far is limited.
So Vietnam has been one of the success stories in Southeast Asia during recent years. How has Vietnam's dealing with the COVID-19 crisis changed the future growth perspective of the country?
Well, if you look at the current situation, we have over 5,000 cases now of new infections every day. And that will definitely have an impact on the GDP growth. You know, I think we estimate that the GDP will be impacted by around 1 to 2% negatively. So if I, for example, look at what Asia Development Bank did, they recently reduced their growth targets for Vietnam from a GDP growth number of 6.7% for 2021 down to 5.8%. But the long-term impact is positive. So, and even putting everything into context, if you look at Indonesia, Philippines, or Thailand, their GDP growth rates expectation for this year are between 2 and 4.5% for 2021. So 5.8% is still a very, very high number.
As you also mentioned, we've seen this incredible growth of the Vietnamese economy during the last couple of years. So where do currently structural opportunities in the Vietnamese economy open up? And what are the main drivers for change in Vietnam?
Well, the structural story of Vietnam is ongoing, and the evolution into a manufacturing and export powerhouse tied into the global supply chains is a key driver for the future of Vietnam. And of course, that triggers all sorts of improvements, for example, in the infrastructure sector, where lots of investments are happening in order to improve the infrastructure of Vietnam. But productivity constantly is a big topic, how to improve productivity of Vietnam and moving the manufacturing value chain up. So that's also a clear target of the Vietnamese government. So especially if you look at foreign direct investments, it's no longer that the Vietnamese government tries to as much money in as possible. They start looking to select a little bit for value added sector where some know-how comes in, which can be obviously transferred to the local economy. And so really there's a lot of efforts and which the government is taking in order to basically improve Vietnam over the coming years.
In which industries do you see currently the most appealing growth opportunities? And can you share some example of stocks that you recently bought for your fund?
As long as the foreign direct investments tied to or related to the manufacturing sector are coming in, which currently is still the case, the numbers are quite staggering. So they're pretty high in comparison to last year and the year before. So I think if that will continue, and I'm sure it will, businesses obviously to manufacturing and exports are thriving. So ports, for example, as you know, Vietnam has a very, very long coastline, many ports. There's a lot of business related opportunities happening in port logistics or ports in general. Then industrial parks. This is also a booming sector. So they are in Vietnam has many industrial parks, and they are on key points from a logistic point of view, where they can basically manufacturing and ship the various goods to the world. And so for example, in terms of examples which you asked me to provide you with a few. So one of our top positions which we have is PTB. They are a furniture manufacturer, and they export around the globe. So they were, for example, managing to increase their profits and the revenues over 50% in the first half of 2021. So clearly that sector was thriving. I mean, maybe you read some of the stories about COVID impact from people who are staying at home, ordering more furniture. That certainly had a positive impact on specifically this company. But also the insurance sector had a nice growth in the first half of 2021. They grew around 17%. And for example, health-related insurance, so health insurances were a main driver of that sector, but also other insurances. So we are invested in one of the companies called ABI. It's basically the insurance arm of the Agriculture Bank, which is the bank with the highest or biggest branch network in Vietnam. And they are using this bank insurance model in order to distribute their insurance products. So they're very well positioned, and look at valuation of both of these companies, PTB and ABI, their PE ratios or price earnings ratio is still below 10, and they're growing very, very fast. But one very interesting sector, which we think long-term will be a long-term investment story, is the renewable energy or green energy sector. So there's, for example, a small company with a market cap of a little bit of over 80 million US dollar called TV2. And they are the leading operator in the green energy sector.
The fund focuses mainly on small and mid caps in Vietnam. How do you deal with this lack of information that many portfolio managers are facing, especially in emerging markets?
Yes, as you rightly said, emerging markets, frontier markets are not as transparent as you would see in, for example, the Western world. But nevertheless, given that we invest in these small companies or mid-sized companies, our stake, which we invest in, becomes quite important given the small size of the company. And with our high stakes of investment, we suddenly actually have access to the top management and will get insights of what these companies are doing. So we have a very close relationship to most of our investments. And in general, we have good contacts in the market, and which is important in a country like Vietnam, that you're well connected. And our fund manager is a Vietnamese citizen, and he's operating in that field since many years, and has a fantastic network. So I would argue that, especially when you invest in these smaller companies, you actually have quite a lot of information from the company itself. And of course, we are using in our investment approach now ESG, so environmental, social, and governance factors when you invest in these companies. And that's an important factor to have access to this top management, to also explain why we invested in the first place and what we would like to see in terms of improvements, especially when it comes to ESG, where Vietnam, of course, has ample room for improvements.
So financial markets currently are discussing a lot about the return of inflation, the potentially rising interest rates, but obviously the long-term effects of COVID-19, which is far from being done yet. What are the major risks for Vietnamese companies looking forward to the second half of 2021 and 2022?
I think the long-term structural story of Vietnam is actually in place due to its ability to evolve into a manufacturing and export powerhouse. This makes Vietnam a standout story globally and not just in the region. But in terms of risks, of course, if the COVID situation gets out of control, this is certainly a very serious risk. For example, if the country can't vaccinate the majority of its population. Roughly, there are 5 million people currently being vaccinated, which is around 5% of total population. But only around 1% have received so far 2 shots, and the rest is still has only received one single jab. But the government currently is ramping up its vaccination effort. They secured quite a number of vaccinations, and they are vaccinating around 1 million people per day. So they are planning that by the end of 2021, that around 60 to 70% of the population should be vaccinated. So then that would place Vietnam in a much better position. But as I said, the COVID situation in Vietnam, of course, is a risk, but also globally. You know, it's of course an export-oriented economy, but without demand for their products. So if we see external shocks, which would hit the export-oriented sector in Vietnam, that would, of course, be also another major risk.
This was Andreas Vogelsanger from Asia Frontier Capital. Thank you very much, Andreas, for being with us today and sharing your insights into the Vietnamese stock market.
Thank you very much for having me. Wish you all a very nice day.